Good afternoon. My name is Rachel McKnight. I'll be your MC this afternoon. On behalf of the U.S. Asia Institute and the premier sponsor of today's event, the Las Vegas Sands Corporation, I'd like to welcome you to this dialogue on agricultural trade with China. We are pleased to have an outstanding roster of speakers who are deeply involved in the U.S.-China relationship. Their insights will be invaluable and serve as a starting point for further engagement and discussion. At this time, to open the program, I welcome Mr. Andy Aboud.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Andy Aboud, Senior Vice President of Government Relations for Las Vegas Sands. Thank you all for joining us today, both in person and virtually, for this important dialogue. Las Vegas Sands is pleased to be the title sponsor of this U.S.-China Dialogue Series in conjunction with our partner, the U.S. Asia Institute. A little bit about Las Vegas Sands for those of you who are not familiar with us. We are the world leader in developing and operating integrated resorts. We developed and operate the Venetian Resort in Las Vegas, which includes the Venetian and Palazzo hotels and the Sands Expo Center, and also the Marina Bay Sands in Singapore and 5 properties in Macau: the Venetian Macau, Sands Macau, the Plaza Macau and Four Seasons Hotel Macau, the Parisian Macau, and finally, our newly renovated property, the Londoner Macau. We've enjoyed our partnership with the U.S. Asia Institute over the years. Giving back to the communities in which we operate is a core value for Las Vegas Sands. And our partnership is a key component of our company's corporate responsibility program, along with our support for the China Development Research Foundation to address rural nutrition needs, hospitality training programs, sports, and support for organizations that promote engagement. In 2019, Las Vegas Sands had the pleasure of hosting the first official United States congressional delegation to visit Macau. This delegation, featuring members of Congress from the Western United States, had an opportunity to tour the Venetian and the Parisian and to learn more about Macau's unique economy and role in promoting trade and investment. This was all made possible by the U.S. Asia Institute. Unfortunately, these educational congressional delegations and other USAI activities were halted during the global pandemic. So we have worked closely with USAI to come up with a different way to continue the education, engagement, and conversation. That is why we're all here today for the first of what we hope will be a series of U.S.-China Dialogue Forums. The goal of this U.S.-China Dialogue Series is to draw focus on how the U.S. and Chinese economies are intertwined and how engagement creates jobs and opportunities for Americans. This series will reach across the United States to showcase why communication and measured engagement with China benefits American businesses, workers, and communities. Among our activities, we'll convene regional forums focused on specific industries engaged in commerce and trade with China. Issues between our two countries will not be solved by disengaging. Rather, more communication is better. This conversation on agricultural trade with China kicks off the series. We are delighted to be in Lincoln, Nebraska, my home state, for this discussion. I would like to thank Glenn Lau-Key, Chairman of the U.S. Asia Institute, along with their President, Mary Sue Bissell, and Rachel McKnight for making today's program and this series possible. Thank you for participating.
Thank you, Andy. Next, we have Mr. Glenn Lau-Key, Chairman of the U.S. Asia Institute, the host of today's forum.
Governor Ricketts, Dr. Albright, other distinguished federal, state, and local government leaders, Minister Xu, Mr. Aboud, honored guests, and panelists. On behalf of the U.S. Asia Institute, I would like to thank you for being part of this important discussion on agricultural trade with China. Though China and the United States may have significant disagreements on various issues, agriculture is one area that presents opportunities along with the challenges. Today's symposium will explore the issues and the possibilities. We are indeed fortunate to have experts from across the spectrum to provide insight into the U.S.-China agricultural trade relationship. The U.S. Asia Institute believes strongly in the importance of dialogue as a foundation for expressing concerns, finding solutions, and keeping the lines of communication open. With today's forum, the U.S. Asia Institute is proud to launch a new initiative, the U.S.-China Dialogue Series. Underwritten by Las Vegas Sands, this series will encourage continued engagement between the U.S. and China on a number of issues, with the first being agriculture. Events such as this will continue to be the mainstay of the U.S. Asia Institute's work, started 42 years ago, to promote open and candid dialogue and understanding. We are delighted to be here in Lincoln, Nebraska for this discussion and are pleased to have so many joining us in person and virtually. Thanks to each of you and welcome.
Thank you, Glenn. And we are delighted that the Honorable Pete Ricketts, Governor of the great state of Nebraska, is with us this afternoon to kick off today's conversation on the importance of agriculture to the U.S.-China relationship. Governor Ricketts, thank you for being here with us.
Great. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody to Lincoln, Nebraska. It is great to be here for the kickoff of this forum, especially considering that Nebraska is an agricultural state. It's our #1 industry here in Nebraska. It makes up about 20% of our overall state GDP and drives about 1 in 4 jobs in our state through agriculture. And China has been an important trading partner for Nebraska. Certainly over the last several years, we've seen that increasingly so. And I think the topic of this conversation, to create more direct dialogue, is important because the relationship between the United States and China probably is the single biggest bilateral relationship in the world today, probably one of the most important along those lines. And as I mentioned, certainly for the state of Nebraska with regard to agricultural products. I would say that if we look at it from the United States perspective, for many years, we took it almost for granted, that relationship with China, and didn't make a lot of changes with regard to that. However, I think that policy is one that has changed with the last administration and continues to change in this administration. That the engagement that we had in the past, we know is not going to be sufficient. The United States must compete with China. President Trump had a relentless focus on right-sizing that trade relationship with China. And that resulted in the Phase 1 trade agreement. And that is a fantastic accomplishment that will benefit both the United States and China. Now, how that all plays together is going to be, of course, what we want to continue to discuss going forward, not only with this Phase 1 trade relationship, but the following trade negotiations that we'll have to follow. China has their Made in China 2025 policy, where they want to become self-sufficient. China has also recently launched the core of its space lab that is going to orbit the Earth. So we see China continuing to make strides in the direction of its plans. How does the United States engage with that with regard to trade? How does that impact the other issues that go along with it? And that's all things that we'll be discussing here. Now, as I mentioned, Phase 1 was a very important relationship. It set 2017 as the baseline for that trading relationship, because that was really where, using that as the baseline where we were before the tariffs changed some of the dynamics of our trading relationship. The goal was for us to increase agricultural exports and the other products covered under Phase 1. The baseline of 2017 covered about $20.8 billion in trade. And China was to increase its imports by about $12.5 billion under Phase 1 for last year. Now, as we went throughout the year, we saw that China did increase its imports of agricultural products, for example, from the United States. However, it only reached about $27.3 billion, or about $6.5 billion increase or about half the amount that was agreed to. However, in the current year, we have seen those commodity purchases increase. We have seen, for example, the United States export about 59 million pounds of corn, bushels of soybeans, and China accounts for about 60% of that. In fact, China's purchase of soybeans is about 3 times of where it was the previous year. Corn is also in the same boat. China's purchase of corn represents about over doubling of where it was the previous year. And overall, we expect corn exports out of the United States to increase by about 43%. We also see that while our exports of hogs was expected to be about 4.5 million tons, is not going to reach that same, 4.85 million tons is not going to be the same as where it was in 2020. It is going to be about double where it was in 2019. Now, what is driving this consumption by China of these commodities? Well, it's a number of things. Obviously, first of all, phase one has certainly been a part of that. We also know that there's other dynamics at play as well. The African swine fever, which had done so much to decimate the hogs in China, is something that is ongoing and creating pork shortages, as well as then, of course, restocking that swine herd is part of what's going on, creating the demand for additional feedstocks. All this is creating tightening commodity stocks in China in general. And then, of course, you've got the favorable exchange rates. And then, of course, the Chinese government's policy is to try and keep food prices stable. All of these things are playing very well for agricultural imports into China, and of course, the United States being one of the great contributors to exporting to China. So that looks very good. Now, the question then becomes, how does that play out in the future? One of the challenges for Nebraska agricultural producers is that when you're dealing with a country like China, you're dealing with a large market. And being dependent on one large buyer creates risk for you, especially one where we see conditions that we don't necessarily see in some of our other trading partners. A very large consumer of our products, one that has got a centrally planned government, and one that is controlled by one party. All that creates unique risks for our producers here when it comes to how they are going to plan their production and when they're going to market their products. So we in the United States have to continue to be thinking about what's this relationship going to look like. And I think the dialogue we're going to have here today will be important because it's necessary for us to be able to have that direct dialogue with China with regard to what is important to the United States as we're looking at this relationship. How does this competition play out going forward so that it can benefit both parties? There's a couple of things that we have to think about here in the United States specifically. Continuing to negotiate around our priorities. While phase one was a great step in the right direction with regard to our agricultural products, we know there's other issues out there. For example, the PRC and the intellectual property theft that has occurred in China, whether we're talking about trade secrets, military, or university, that's an issue that has to be addressed as part of our overall negotiation. We know that tariffs have been a part of our trade relationship over the last several years. That's going to play a role, and certainly something that we don't want to give up on until we've negotiated some of the other aspects of this. And finally, then there's the non-tariff trade barriers, the regulations that go on with regard to China that have to be a part of the overall equation and trade relationship going forward as well. And certainly there are going to be things that the United States is going to find important as a seller to China and a trading partner, things that are going to be sensitive topics, things like human rights. Here in the United States, we believe in the dignity of each individual human. And there are a number of different areas where we have concerns with regard to China. Specifically fulfilling with regard, as one example, its commitments to Hong Kong and the agreements that were signed there with regard to how Hong Kong will be treated going forward. Also respecting our status or our policy with regard to the status of Taiwan. So there's a lot of different issues that we are going to be addressing here as this relationship goes forward. It's important that we have that direct dialogue to make sure that as we have this most important relationship between China and the United States, we can work out these issues to the benefit of both the Chinese and the American people. Only by working on these issues to the satisfaction of both will we have a stable trade relationship. Now, what are we doing here in Nebraska? Well, certainly some of these things will be handled at the federal level. We'll have some federal folks, federal government officials here to talk about that. From the state's perspective, we think about how do we continue to expand our trade relationships? And addressing that one issue that I talked about earlier with regard to diversification, how can we make sure we're giving opportunities for our producers to have the most open market opportunities around the world as possible? Now, certainly with the pandemic, our ability to do trade missions has been curtailed. We haven't been able to travel the way we would like to. However, in 2019, we were able to go to countries like Vietnam, Japan, and Germany to be able to help grow our trade relationships and look at diversifying our markets so that we can reduce our risk here in the United States. Those are some of the things that I think all states will have to think about as they go forward with this regard to this relationship with regard to China and the other nations of the earth, as you think about how do we expand trade, how is that relationship going to change with the pandemic, and where do we take it from here? These are all great topics for conversation. I know we're going to have a lot of great panelists who are going to be talking about these and other issues, and I'm excited to be able to continue this conversation about our relationship with China. As I said, it is so important that we get this right, not only for our nations, but for the entire world. So once again, thank you very much for attending this conference, even if it is virtual. Certainly a condition of the pandemic. We're looking forward to working our way through this pandemic so we can have more in-person meetings. But I think you're going to find there's a lot of great content, a lot of valuable dialogue. And I'm looking forward to hosting one of the panels a little bit later to be able to address some of these important issues. With that, I wish you all well on the rest of the conference and look forward to the great dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Ricketts. Thank you for those wonderful remarks, for welcoming us so warmly to Nebraska, and for moderating a panel in just a few moments. In the meantime, we look forward to having, now we are honored to hear from an individual who most of you are familiar with. She was at the center of U.S. diplomacy while serving as the U.S. Secretary of State, and remains engaged as the chairman of Albright Stonebridge Group based in Washington, D.C. And now we will hear from Ambassador Madeleine Albright.
Good day to all of you. We live in a great technological age that allows me to speak to you remotely, not only through space, but also through time. It is May 4th there, but only April 29th here. In other words, this is pre-recorded, which is my foolproof method for avoiding last-minute technical glitches. That doesn't make me old-fashioned. It just makes me quite literally ahead of my time. I'm so pleased to be joining this important forum, highlighting one area where U.S. China relations remain robust, our agricultural trade flows. And it's a pleasure to be kicking off this dialogue together with Governor Ricketts and Chinese Embassy Minister Xu. As you can see, I've tried to marry themes with the pin that I'm wearing today, representing the Chinese lunar year of the bull and one of Nebraska's most prized agricultural commodities. I would also like to thank both the U.S. Asia Institute and Las Vegas Sands for organizing and sponsoring this forum. U.S. agricultural exports to China, which surpassed $26 billion in 2020, are a concrete and much needed reminder of the value created by our bilateral relationship, as imperfect as it is. I deeply appreciate your organization's investment in this people-to-people exchange. It gives us the opportunity for open discussion on both the opportunities and challenges we must seize and address to improve agricultural trade flows in the future. We need this kind of dialogue more than ever as we meet at a moment of rising tension and uncertainty in the U.S.-China relationship. Once organized around cooperation and constructive engagement, in quotes, the relationship is now organized around competition, bilaterally and on the global stage. Of course, competition can be healthy and spur progress, and that is a key point I want to make today. Just because our bilateral relationship has become competitive doesn't mean that it can't create value or yield benefits for both the US and China and for the world. The challenge then is, how can our governments and our companies manage contention and competition in a way that durably and sustainably creates value? I know you'll be hearing from current US and Chinese government officials on these critically important issues, so allow me to try to frame the discussion through my own experience as an observer and participant in this relationship over the past 40 plus years. The story begins in the late 1970s when I was in the White House on the staff of National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski. My job was to maintain good relations with Congress, an assignment that has often been compared then and now to herding cats, present company excluded, of course. In that capacity, I had the privilege of accompanying one of the first US Senate delegations to Beijing and Shanghai as our countries were working to normalize bilateral relations with China. To me, the trip felt exciting, in part because for almost 30 years, there had been little contact between our two countries. And even though it was a few years after Nixon's visit to China, most of what we knew about each other still came from magazines and history books, and much of that information was inaccurate, distorted, or just plain wrong. Our lack of familiarity meant that our meetings, although friendly, were also formal and stiff. Both sides were curious about the other and very polite, but no one dared to inject humor in the conversation or felt able to relax. Because we represented vastly different cultures, ideologies, and economic systems, we were each unsure about what the other wanted and failed fully to envision where those initial conversations might lead, or how soon the relationship would be transformed. It was just a month later when President Carter made the announcement about U.S. China normalization, followed by the historic visit to the White House by Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping. In the late 1990s, when I was Secretary of State, my regular interactions with Chinese counterparts was integral to so many American interests and global policy priorities. My meetings with China's foreign ministers were routine at first. We both sides kept sticking to our prepared talking points, and it seemed as though we never got anywhere in those meetings. So I finally suggested that we just hand each other our prepared talking points and then have a real strategic discussion. He happily obliged, and our meetings became far more interesting as a result. One of the topics that we discussed the most was China's potential membership in the World Trade Organization. China's membership, we thought, would be good for both nations, and China's closer integration with global economic and political institutions would benefit the world. We saw the potential for cooperation on issues from combating terrorism to stopping the spread of nuclear weapons, and we thought that the international system would be stronger with China integrated in it. We also saw the potential benefits of trade for our farmers, our workers, our companies, and our consumers. As we gather here today, these ideas may seem quaint. I need not tell you that we now face a far more complex and challenging picture. Relations have become so fraught that it can be tempting to look back at the time between 1979 and just a few years ago with a sense of nostalgia, as if it was a golden era sandwiched between longer periods of confrontation and struggle. The challenges in U.S. China relations today certainly are not a fluke or a one-off affair. They are the culmination of tensions built up over the past decade, including criticisms about China's accession to the WTO. Trade ties may have once been the ballast of this relationship, but today they are instead the tip of the spear of a whole host of concerns about U.S.-China relations. But as someone who has lived through the ups and downs of this relationship, it's worth pointing out that we have experienced significant crises before over the past 30 years. The current bilateral rivalry over values, systems, markets, and security will not diminish, and this dramatically increases the possibility for crisis. As with previous crises, the durability of the U.S. China bilateral relationship will be tested as competition spreads and plays out on the global stage. But a more competitive bilateral relationship should not preclude the U.S. and China from working together to strengthen our economies and meet the numerous global challenges where our two countries' interests align. Of course, we have to be realistic. American and Chinese concerns over competitiveness and national security will inhibit some areas of bilateral trade. We have to work to make those restrictions as limited as possible. Agricultural trade between our two countries is one area where we can strive to make progress. And I call on all of us to step up advocacy to remind our leaders that U.S.-China agricultural trade ties are needed, not only to benefit our farmers and workers and consumers in our economies, but also to provide a ballast, a stabilizing force as we manage a more contentious U.S.-China relationship going forward. So forums such as this are so important to discuss ways to resolve existing problems and seize opportunities. You are critical stakeholders. The task you face is to maximize your leverage as critical stabilizers. I've often heard it said, and perhaps because I've said it so often myself, the U.S.-China relationship is among the most significant in the world. One has only to imagine the difference between a globe in which the United States and China are bitter rivals and one in which we are partners and, yes, competitors striving to resolve international problems. The bottom line is that we must make this relationship work, even if the nature of this relationship continues to change. And this doesn't mean that we will always agree, because we won't. It doesn't mean that we should retreat from basic principles or abandon cherished values, because we shouldn't. It does mean that we should endeavor to compete, not just strategically, but as healthy as way as possible. Agricultural trade continues to create value for both our countries, but we have to continue to strive for more openness, fewer restrictions, and a more level playing field defined by reciprocity to maximize those benefits for farmers and consumers. And that means that all of you have a vital responsibility, one that I'm confident you will meet. So read my pins. Agricultural trade is and shall remain vital to the stability of the U.S.-China relationship. And my best wishes are for a most productive forum. Thank you so much for allowing me to join you in this virtual way.
As always, an inspirational message from Secretary Albright. Thank you so much, Secretary Albright. Next, we are privileged to hear from one of China's top emissaries to the United States, Minister Xu. She will address the importance of agriculture in the U.S.-China relationship. And now I turn it over to you, Minister Xu.
Thank you, Rachel. Governor Ricketts, Secretary Albright, Senior Vice President Abood, Chairman Lau-Ki, ladies and gentlemen, it is such a great honor to be invited to the opening ceremony of U.S.-China Policy Series as the representative of Ambassador Cui Tiankai. Actually, two years ago, I paid a visit to Nebraska, a state that left deep impression to me. I led a working group of the Chinese embassy to visit Nebraska. During our visit, we took a tour of Meat Cattle Company. Our gracious hosts told us that China was importing large amounts of beef from Australia, and they hoped that their beef, which is corn-fed and better than Australia's grass-fed beef, could soon be sold to China. I replied that China had a population of 1.4 billion, a big market for both corn-fed and grass-fed beef. What came to my mind then was that I liked American corn very much, but I didn't like grass. Maybe the beef fed with corn would be more delicious than that fed with grass. More than 2 years have passed. China-US relations have remained tense. Some Americans describe the Communist Party of China as an evil, and China as an alien that steals intellectual property rights, abuses human rights, and violates rules and order. The US government identifies China as a major strategic competitor and then the most serious competitor. It takes out competing China as a driving force for bipartisan unity, uses democracy versus autocracy as an eye catcher to promote domestic agenda, and chooses a China policy that may lead to conflict and a confrontation in China-US relations. In response, the Chinese government has to act resolutely to defend our national interests and safeguard the hard-won achievements in China-US relations. In the meantime, the giant ship of China-US relation is still breaking waves and forging ahead. The cornerstones that have buttressed our relations over the past 4 decades, that is, economic and trade cooperation, subnational exchanges, and people-to-people friendship remain unshaken. The two peoples still have high hopes for benefiting from the development of these relations as they did before. Take economic and trade relations as an example. In 2020, despite the impact of COVID-19 and the unhelpful political environment, China-US trade in goods still increased by 8.8%, and China's import from the United States grew by 10.1%. For agriculture, the two-way trade in this section reached $30.17 billion US dollars, including 23.72 billion of China's imports from America, up by 67.5% year-on-year. It is estimated that such trade added 177,900 jobs, 177,900 jobs for the United States. Some people say that this is due to the implementation of Phase 1 trade deal. No doubt, China's implementation of the agreement has been serious and fruitful. However, if there had been no trade war, no forced increase in tariffs, and no artificially damaged atmosphere in China-US relations, wouldn't the situation have been even better? Ladies and gentlemen, the China-US relationship is at a crossroads. The US policy toward China is undergoing changes of overarching importance. Whether there will be more challenges or more opportunities in the 2021 and beyond depends on the choice of the US side and how the US views China, a country led by the Communist Party of China. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Communist Party of China. We will look back at the CPC's glorious course of growing from a small party with only a few dozen members to the world's largest party with more than 90 million members. We will review the CPC's great contributions in leading the Chinese people to realize the country's rise. We will also renew our commitments and get ourselves ready with greater enthusiasm for the cause of realizing the greater rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. While we celebrate the centennial of the CPC, the world needs to see that China has made such achievements because the CPC is dedicated to pursuing happiness for the people and rejuvenation for the nation. Socialism is, with Chinese characteristics, best suits China's conditions. The CPC enjoys an approval rate of over 93%, and it is the Chinese people who will have the final say on whether the CPC has done a good job. These facts should be accepted and respected by the United States. If some people do not believe that the Chinese nation with 5,000 years of civilization has the wisdom to choose the right system and the path, that the 1 billion Chinese people have the right to choose their own governing party, that China has the wisdom to take care of its internal affairs, including Taiwan, Hong Kong, etc., in its best interest. If they want to impose their will on China and obstruct China's development through containment, they are bound to be disappointed and they are bound to fail. This year also marks the 50th anniversary of Dr. Henry Kissinger's secret visit to China, who has lately expressed his deep concern for the current situation and prospects of China-US relations. He warned that the tension with China is the biggest problem for America, the biggest problem for the world. The purpose of China's development is not to defeat anybody else, but to revive itself, to surpass itself, and meet the people's aspiration for a better life. As major countries, neither China nor the United States can turn the other into itself. Both sides must accept that the other side will have different ideas, policies, and practices on many issues, but their shared interests far outnumber their differences. They should not take their own standards as the only standard and force their own preference upon the other side. Mutual respect, seeking common ground while reserving differences, and win-win cooperation are the only feasible way for the two countries to get along. Ladies and gentlemen, China is now promoting a new development paradigm with domestic circulation as the mainstay and international and domestic circulations reinforcing each other. In the next 15 years, China's GDP will double on both aggregate and per capita terms. In 2020, China's total GDP stood at 16 trillion US dollars, and in 2035, it will exceed 31 trillion US dollars. As China continues to develop, it will not change its basic state policy of reform and opening up. Instead, it will only open wider with greater momentum. China will continue to improve its business environment that is based on market principles, governed by law and up to international standards. As President Xi Jinping has repeatedly stated publicly, China will open its door only wider to the world, and it welcomes all countries to share its development opportunities. In such a context, be it Make America Great Again or Build Back Better, it's advisable for the United States not to view China as an adversary or even enemy for vicious competition, but rather to regard it as a partner for common progress and prosperity. In China, agriculture is always deemed as the foundation of people's livelihood and development. Over the decades, the Chinese government has made tremendous efforts to modernize the agriculture sector and achieved great success, especially alleviate 770 million people from poverty. In the future, in order to achieve high quality development of agriculture and meet the people's growing aspiration for a better life, China will continue to prioritize agriculture in its overall development strategy and will also open its agriculture wider. The United States is the top agricultural power in the world, while China is a major developing agricultural country. The two countries have broad prospects for cooperation in agricultural trade, agricultural science and technology, agricultural, ecological protection, and other fields. Ladies and gentlemen, on the eve of Chinese New Year, President Xi Jinping spoke with President Joe Biden on the phone, pointing the direction for the development of bilateral relations and sending a positive signal to the world. Soon afterwards, as an important step to follow through on the spirits of their call, the two sides held a high-level strategic dialogue, which was timely and beneficial, and it deepened mutual understanding. Recently, President Xi, at the invitation of President Biden, attended the Leaders' Summit on Climate and delivered an important speech, showing China's readiness to work with the U.S. to tackle global challenges. Climate envoys of the two countries have also maintained close communication. With regard to agriculture, Mr. Tang Renjian, Minister of Agriculture and Rural Affairs of China, had a telephone conversation with Mr. Vilsack, Secretary of Agriculture of the U.S. on March the 23rd. The two sides had productive discussion on how to implement the consensus of the two heads of states and take new steps to promote agriculture cooperation between the two countries. China's policy towards the United States is consistent and clear. It is committed to achieving no conflict, no confrontation, mutual respect, and win-win cooperation with the United States. It is hoped that the U.S. government will show political foresight, courage, and determination, properly manage challenges, seize opportunities, and work with China to achieve healthy and stable development of China-U.S. relations. We hope and believe that in this process, subnational governments and various social sectors of the United States, including you who are present today in this seminar, will continue to be a staunch force for the development of China-U.S. relations. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today, Minister Xu. To complete this first session, we are deeply honored to have policymakers from across the region joining Governor Ricketts, who will moderate this discussion. Governor, I hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you all very much for joining us here today. We've got some great panelists here. What I'm going to do is introduce our panelists one at a time and give them an opportunity to say a few words. And then we'll come back and I'll ask a few questions to each of the panelists, offer it up for other panelists to be able to jump in, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started? I'll start with one of my colleagues, Governor Laura Kelly from the neighboring state of Kansas, the great state of Kansas. Governor Kelly, would you like to start by making an introduction? Tell us a little about yourself.
Well, thank you so much, Governor Ricketts, and good afternoon to everyone else. I am Kansas Governor Laura Kelly, and I'm very pleased to be here to discuss the importance of agricultural trade in Kansas and how we can work together to maintain and grow strong trade agreements with China. I'm also honored to participate in today's panel alongside this esteemed group of United States representatives and you, Governor Ricketts. You know, here in Kansas, agriculture is the backbone of our economy. We're national leaders in agricultural production. We're first in wheat and sorghum. We're second in cropland acreage. We're third in cattle and calves. With our long history of agricultural excellence, it's no surprise that Kansas has always been and always will be an export state. In 2020, we exported over $4 billion in goods worldwide, up nearly 6% from the previous year. And for the first time, we surpassed the $4 billion mark, first time since 2014. While Mexico and Japan are our top purchasers, Since 2010, our exports to China grew from just under 60 million to over $330 million in 2020, which made up 8% of our total exports. Kansas farmers excel at row crop agricultural production and are well positioned to meet China's grain and oil seed needs. Kansas agriculture has benefited substantially from the improved access that has resulted from the Phase 1 agreement with China. We've seen growth in sorghum exports, which is a significant portion of Kansas's agriculture exports to China. And both the beef and dairy sectors have gained additional market access. Going forward, our top priority is to ensure the Phase 1 agreement is enforced and maintain the progress it's made. It's imperative for our state's agricultural sector and our economy as a whole that the U.S. and China establish free, fair, and equitable trade that is consistent and reliable in the long term. And with that, I look forward to further discussion on how we can all work together at the state and federal levels to promote strong relations with China. Thanks. Thank you, Governor Ricketts. Back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Governor Kelly. Yeah, let's give her a warm round of applause, please. Thank you. Our next panelist is Representative Darren LaHood from Illinois. He is on the House Ways and Means Committee and the U.S. China Working Group. Representative LaHood, would you like to say a few words, please?
Well, sure. Thank you, Governor Ricketts. And let me just thank you. And I want to thank the U.S. Asia Institute and Las Vegas Sands for hosting today's event. I'm coming to you today from Peoria, Illinois, the heartland of America. And Governor Ricketts, as a lifelong Cubs fan, I'll say go Cubs. Want to get that in. And it's an honor to be here today with my distinguished colleagues on the call and on the panel today. And as you mentioned, Governor Ricketts, I serve on the Ways and Means Committee with Congressman Adrian Smith. And the Ways and Means Committee has, of course, jurisdiction over tax and trade and healthcare policy. And I also serve on the Intelligence Committee. Since 2016, I've been proud to serve as the co-chair of the bipartisan U.S. China Working Group with Congressman Rick Larsen of Washington. And our group works to provide a platform in Congress for engagement on U.S. China relations. We work to educate members of Congress and their staffs on related policy matters. We consult regularly with academia and business leaders and government officials. Congressman Larsen and I have led 2 bipartisan member delegations to China in the last few years, and we look forward to returning once COVID has passed. I was also proud to be appointed by Leader McCarthy last year to serve on the Republican China Task Force. In September, we provided a report that outlined areas of concern within the U.S.-China relationship and a number of bipartisan legislative solutions to address them and improve the relationship. In the district that I'm fortunate enough to represent in Illinois, agriculture is vital. I remind folks all the time, ag is the #1 industry in the state of Illinois. And in my district, we're blessed to have some of the most fertile farmland in the entire country. My district ranks as the 10th largest district in the country in terms of corn and soybean production, and we grow over 95% of the pumpkins produced in the world. Given that 95% of the world's consumers are located outside of the United States, trade is very important to the farmers and agribusiness in my district and in Illinois. It is imperative that we are able to seamlessly transport and sell our products all around the world. There is no doubt that China is an important market for U.S. agriculture. I applaud President Trump for his work to secure the Phase 1 deal, and I was appreciative to be at the signing ceremony at the White House last year with our Chinese officials. Ensuring strict enforcement of this agreement will determine future opportunities for cooperation on trade and related issues. That said, as China continues to play an increasingly important and influential role in the international community, it is important that China work to adopt international norms and standards in the trade space, and also to work on reforms to the World Trade Organization. Given that the US and China have the first and second largest economies in the world, there will always be areas of both cooperation and strain within the relationship by the nature of the two. As such, I support regular and continued dialogue to best address these challenges. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be included today. Look forward to answering additional questions. Thank you, Governor.
All right, that's the applause line, guys. Come on, let's go. Thank you, Representative LaHood. Our next esteemed panelist is Representative Kim Schreier from Washington State. She also is on the U.S. China Working Group, only this time representing the House Agricultural Committee. Representative Schreier, would you like to say a few words, please?
Delighted. Well, hello, I'm Kim Schreier, representative from Washington's 8th Congressional District, a vast region that stretches from the suburbs of Seattle across the Cascade Mountains to the fertile farmland of central Washington. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here because Washington State exporters hold our relationship with China in very high regard. It is an important one. You may think of Microsoft and Amazon and Starbucks when you think of Washington State, but agriculture is at the economic heart of my district. In fact, Central Washington is home to some of the nation's largest growers and exporters. In fact, our major exports include Timothy hay, wheat, apples, cherries, pears, and potatoes. And China is a really important market for Washington State. In fact, China has historically been the #2 importer of hay, the #3 importer of cherries, and overall, China represents our 3rd largest export market. So the relationship is incredibly important. Now, tariffs and retaliatory tariffs have hurt Washington farmers, and I'm happy to see de-escalation there. And the Phase 1 agreement was ambitious, and although we haven't seen quite the numbers promised, there have been significant advancements, particularly for fresh potatoes, blueberries, barley, and alfalfa. But some challenges remain. So one is that some of the greatest appeal of Washington agriculture is its quality. So the missed opportunities to taste and feel and personally inspect the apples, cherries, and hay from our state because of the pandemic, while understandable, has hurt. In fact, when you look at overall hay exports from the US to China, it looks outstanding. But nearly all of that is alfalfa, not the prized Timothy hay grown here in Washington State. In fact, my Timothy hay farmers have told me that they've shipped next to nothing to China this year, despite growing the best in the world. And when buyers can't see and feel the difference, then hay is just hay. And by the way, for those of you out there who believe hay is just hay, you should know that Timothy hay fuels Kobe beef and the world's fastest racehorses. So this inability to visit in person has also been a missed opportunity to nurture personal relationships and build trust between sellers and buyers. And now another hurdle I'd just like to mention are some arbitrary sanitary phytosanitary restrictions. For example, frozen food exports are now inspected for any trace of coronavirus. And international health experts agree that the genetic fingerprint, the genetic material, poses absolutely no risk to human health. But if any trace is found, then the food can be placed in quarantine, leaving our farmers to foot the bill for storage and refrigeration for up to 2 months. And this can result in spoilage, but can also threaten really great relationships with buyers in China who are depending on quality and an arrival date. Now, fundamentally, our farmers very much appreciate the trade relationships they have with China. They want stability and predictability and normalized trade. And we are so delighted that customers in China value Washington State's crops. Our farmers are honored to provide safe, nutritious, high quality food to the people of China. And as China's prosperity and middle class continue to grow, we see an expanding role for Washington ag. So this is really a win-win relationship. Washington farmers gain a market share and Chinese consumers get the best produce and hay in the world. So Washington and China both benefit from a strong trade relationship. And I thank you and I'm delighted to be here today.
Thank you, Representative Schreier. Next, we're going to go to a couple of Nebraskans. I'm honored to be sitting next to, actually, in person here rather than virtual, Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, who represents Nebraska's 1st Congressional District and is on the House House Appropriations Committee, Agricultural Subcommittee ranking member. Congressman, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you very much, Governor. Pleasure to see you and all of you who are watching. Let me also thank the U.S. Asia Institute, as well as the private sector who has underwritten this important discussion today on both the importance of trade as well as the challenges and opportunities. You have to ask yourself a fundamental question. What is the purpose of trade? The answer, it has to be the well-being of both peoples, of both nations. That implies fairness, reciprocity, and relationship. These purposes should inform the processes of mutuality and well-being. The reality is America grows food. We grow a lot of it. We grow it well. Our huge trade imbalance with China would be immeasurably worse were it not for agricultural exports. While the question today might be a little bit more narrow about ensuring the process of robust trade, that possibility is driven by a multitude of factors, all related to the value proposition of trust. The reality is that China and the United States have different economic systems, different political systems, and different foundational narratives. In America, our history, the story of our soul, is defined by individual dignity, opportunities for enhancement, and responsibility to our neighbor. Regarding China, I once had a powerful experience in the city of Nanjing. I stood in front of what is called the Rape of Nanjing, a powerful, horrific depiction of brutality, of what happened to the Chinese people at the hands of a foreign invader. The Chinese sense of its soul, its narrative as a nation, is defined by the trauma of past war, defeat, humiliation, and the call for respect, as we heard earlier. This sense lends itself to a collective effort of Chinese nationalism to secure itself, to project itself on the international stage, and to demand that level of respect as well. This also leads to differing perspectives on economics and security. The question then becomes how we move forward as two people with manifest differences over trade, over security, and over human rights. Trade does not sit outside of these important considerations. Is trade important? Yes. Can trade enhance relationship? Yes. Do the Chinese people benefit from exceptional American agricultural products? Yes. Can agriculture be the vehicle to advance fair trade, the airing of grievances, and a more deliberate attempt at a political security settlement? I think it has to. As Americans, we are the most generous people on the earth as a nation. We provide about $25 billion a year in humanitarian aid. A portion of that is for food security. We do that because as Americans, we just don't sit back and watch as other people die. We also benefit from this through cultural and economic exchange. And finally, it creates the conditions for stability worldwide, which is essential for our own national security and the security of other peoples. Food. Food is personal. Food is purposeful. Food is powerful. I find it very interesting that China has recently ascended to the leadership role of a very important multilateral institution with a long history, the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization in Rome. That organization advances food and peace around the world. So, trade, diplomacy, and development are inextricably intertwined for that very purpose of well-being, as opposed to just transactions. This is not only about the American-Chinese trading relationship. The American farmer has to be a direct beneficiary of the national policies that we do pursue. And the question is how we enhance mutually beneficial trade that is sustainable to the farmer and to the environment, that enhances goodwill in relationship, and that is an invitation to diplomatic development around the world to prevent starvation, dislocation, outmigration, desertification, and the possibility of war. Trade is a part of the larger ecosystem of relationship, and agriculture plays a key role. Thank you very much. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Representative Fortenberry. And last but certainly not least, from Nebraska's 3rd Congressional District, Representative Adrian Smith, who sits on the House Ways and Means Committees. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you to all the participants there today. It's great to be with you, even if it's virtually. I'm honored to be with you. These topics of discussion, I think, are very timely and important. I think show a great opportunity for the future to speak to some of the challenges we currently face as well. But I think as we talk about international trade, there is so much opportunity. We made a lot of progress in terms of updating our trade agreements with Mexico, Canada, South Korea, and then obviously the phase 1 agreements with China and Japan. Our ag exporters are eager to continue to engage. And I think it's important that we focus on how far we've come and also constantly evaluate where we are with the things like phase 1 with China, and then also celebrate how far we have come. When you look at 2020, it's a record-setting year for the United States, exporting over $27 billion worth of agriculture products just to China. And I think as we work on the Ways and Means Committee to continue our efforts to level the playing field with trade, I'm eager to represent the most productive agriculture districts in the nation with beef, corn, many other products. In fact, 1 in 5 jobs across Nebraska is supported by trade and exports. And so I think we see a bright future with trade. We know that domestically speaking, we can increase wages and grow our economy with expanded trade. I think China actually represents a significant opportunity moving forward. Even though we have set a record in terms of ag exports to China, ag exports only, or actually Chinese agriculture imports are composed of only 14% coming from the U.S. And so that tells me that there are a lot of opportunities ahead. I know the previous administration, the Trump administration, worked to address many of the challenges, and culminating with the phase 1 agreement, which I hope we can discuss more in depth here shortly. I know looking ahead, the Biden administration has their work cut out for them. I'm anxious to learn from Ambassador Tai, a great expert in Chinese policy. I'm anxious to work with her as we do look forward to expanding our exports into China. I'm glad that Ambassador Tai actually has a background from the Ways and Means Committee as well. I know she enjoys a great deal of support on both sides of the aisle in her new endeavors. So I know that our challenges, based on the fact that China oftentimes plays by their own set of rules, that creates unique challenges. But we need to continue to have dialogue so that we can expand and grow our relationship, and that so that we on the Ways and Means Committee can focus on the future together and continue to grow our relationships and our partnerships.
That's it.
All right. Thank you very much, Representative Smith. All right. Now we're going to go back through the panelists. I'm going to all ask you a question, and then we'll open up to the other panelists as well if they want to weigh in. I'm going to start with Governor Kelly in Kansas. Governor, obviously, as the leader of your state, you are very involved in the relationships internationally. Obviously, pandemics presented some challenge to us. But could you talk to us a little bit about how you think about that relationship with China? What have you done with regard to trade policies in China? What are some of the things, I know you hit upon some of the commodities that are important to you, but just tell us a little bit about how you take your role with regard to developing that relationship with China and expanding trade prospects.
In fact, one of the very first things that I did when I
我最初我做的那些事情，
when I became governor
我成为州长的时候，
reestablish our international trade division, which had been essentially eliminated during the previous administration. So we have built that back up to be a rather robust division within our Department of Commerce, particularly to focus on relationships with China and other global countries. So we take that very seriously, and we're going to build then, particularly with China, on the 40-year relationship that we have had, particularly with the Henan province, where we established a sister state relationship with them way back. We, over the time, in addition to trade, which we've been working on, in fact, just last month, ag leaders from Kansas and from Henan province were negotiating a new deal on containerized grain shipments to China. We brought together suppliers and buyers to virtually to start working at really growing and enhancing that aspect. We have sustained a number of exchange programs with China over these 40 years. We've done a lot of educational exchanges. In fact, we have a university here in the state of Kansas, Fort Hays State University, which actually has an online enrollment of Chinese students of over 7,000. And this is at a school that doesn't have 7,000 students on campus. So we've been doing that for quite a while. We're very big in animal health. We're sort of on that animal health corridor between Manhattan, Kansas and Columbia, Missouri. We have used that in our exchange programs with the Henan province. We've also worked closely with them on ag business infrastructure, exchanging ideas and strategies for that. And then last but certainly not least has been in the energy sector. So we've been very engaged. I continue to be engaged and ensure that my Department of Commerce is reaching out and making those connections and ensuring that when opportunities avail themselves, that we're there to take advantage of them. In addition, we're also very involved with the U.S. Grains Council Export Exchange and the U.S. Soy Global Trade Exchange. We interface a lot between Kansas and Chinese officials. So it's important to us. I think China is our fourth largest. We export, that's the fourth largest group. And we want to grow that if it's all possible. So we will continue to reach out and work closely.
Representative LaHood, we've talked a lot about the trade, obviously and agriculture, the focus of this policy series. Wanted to ask you though, you sit on that U.S. China working group, and while trade exports to China have, with regard to agriculture, have increased under the Phase 1 trade deal, we've also touched upon some of the other issues between the United States and China, things like Hong Kong, the status of Taiwan. We didn't mention the Uyghurs, but that would be another potential issue with regard to human rights. Is it possible, how do trade and those other policy issues play together? Is it possible to separate those? How do you think about how all those different factors weigh in when you're thinking about what you and your group are doing with regard to U.S. China policy?
Well, thanks, Governor Ricketts. I think it's a tough question to answer. I think it's gotten more difficult. I think the short answer is yes, you need to separate them, but I think it's gotten more difficult in doing that. If you look at the history in the Congress, if you went back 20 years, you used to have kind of separate groups as it related to China. You had the human rights hawks, you had the economic hawks, and you had the national security hawks. And they've kind of all found each other now in terms of the approach to China. They may come from different districts and different backgrounds, but there is much more of an adversarial approach when it comes to China. And so, that continues to be an element within the Congress in terms of the approach with China. I think people agree the bilateral relationship is an important one. And I have many of our colleagues, particularly on the Republican side, that would prefer to go to a Cold War mentality. I don't think that's the approach we ought to take, but you have to find that balance. And I think that's the point of your question. I think what we're looking for are tangible results that the Chinese are making progress. there's a reputation, and I think it's real, that China doesn't abide by the same rules and standards, the laws and norms that many other industrialized countries in the world do. And they play by a different set of rules. And whether you look at national security, you look at human rights or religious rights, you look at trade, you look at tech, you look at the issues surrounding COVID, and you look at trade. There are many examples in all of those sectors where China has not, again, abided by the same rules and standards that the United States or other industrialized countries in the world have. So that's been a frustration. It was mentioned earlier, I'm generally not a fan of tariffs. I think tariffs are taxes. They're taxes on my farmers and businesses, manufacturers. But some would argue that the trade war that we were in for the first 2 years of the Trump administration actually got the Chinese to come to the table. And that's how we got the phase 1 deal done. That pressure caused them to come. And I think the benefits of phase 1 have been good for my farmers and for the country. But a lot of it is much more of a purchase agreement than it is systemic changes to China and moving them forward. And as we look at phase 2, which many of the enforcement mechanisms and changes that I think would be beneficial in the relationship, those are located there. I also mentioned earlier in my earlier comments, reform of the World Trade Organization. I think that has to be essential moving forward. Again, to tighten up the rules and to make sure that we're all on the same set of rules when it comes to trade. I think that will help in the relationship also. But again, if you think about the analogy that this is somehow we should move to a Cold War, I mean, China is not what Russia was in the 1980s. We are intricately intertwined. China has a middle class that's 500 million. We have lots of companies there. I use the example in my district. I have the largest concentration of Caterpillar workers anywhere in the world that make a lot of D10 tractors and excavators. In China, Caterpillar has 29 manufacturing plants, 4 R&D facilities. Trade with China and the relationship is good for my workers in Illinois. And so we are, again, we are intertwined economically. And so finding that balance and getting China to come along with these changes will be an important, and the private sector plays a role on that, on how we get them to make those changes and move forward. But I think the bottom line, Governor, is we need to have tangible results. We need to see that China takes these issues seriously. And if they don't, I think there will be ramifications. And the last point that I would make, we saw a little of this in the supply chain issue during COVID. The US was very vulnerable when it came to PPE, generic drugs, pharmaceuticals. 95% came from China. And there's a recognition that we never want to be that vulnerable again. And so how do we move back those supply chains to the United States? On the Ways and Means Committee, Representative Smith and I have looked at a number of different bills on how you bring those supply chains back by incentivizing companies through the tax code there. I think you're going to see more of that in Congress. And I think that's beneficial to the United States, but that will affect the relationship with China. So those are a few of my thoughts. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Would any of the other panelists like to weigh in on that question?
I could give a few comments, pick up on a few things that my colleague Darren LaHood said. In Congress, again, as the governor mentioned, I'm the ranking member of the Agricultural Appropriations Committee of responsibility for the Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration. The most recent issue, again, being part of the concern about economic dislocation and vulnerability, particularly during COVID, is the reality of the number of drugs as well as precursor drug ingredients that do come from China and our vulnerability there. The Food and Drug Administration can conduct surprise inspections on American manufacturing facilities. Try doing that in China. That's just not a reality. And so again, it's another one of those factors that weighs against American competitive production here that we need to look at. Another one, for instance, in Beijing, the air is so polluted, it takes 5 years off your life. Again, that's an externality cost that we embed through regulation into the cost of our manufacture of our own goods. But that's not the case in China, unlevel playing field that gives them a competitive advantage. So the idea of harmonization and reciprocity and reforms to the World Trade Organization are very important so that we have some, again, harmonization of systems so that we are truly competing in a fair manner.
Great, thank you. All right, so next I'm going to go ahead and go to Representative Schreier. Representative Schreier, can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the logistical challenges you have? You talked about how agriculture was important for your district, and what can the federal or state government do to be able to help you out on that?
Look, farming is by its very nature always fraught with uncertainty, whether that is weather, in my state, wildfires, road transportation, rail, the ports, whatever. You know, our farmers need predictability and kind of just anything that makes them feel more stable is helpful. So things like, you know, a wildly swinging demand for wheat, for example, can hurt them. I talked about the sanitary, phytosanitary requirements with regard to coronavirus that have no basis in science, but cause a great deal of harm to our farmers. But I gotta tell you that there is one issue that right now rises above all of them in terms of logistics, and I'll bet it affects all of us from all of our states, which is this issue of containers and shipping. And you know, I'll tell you kind of what I'm hearing and what I'm putting together is that we've always had a trade imbalance, with more coming from China to the US than we export. But we've kind of figured out how to make that a doable dance. But with the pandemic, people in the United States are not buying services as much. They've been buying more and more goods, and the goods come from China. And so what had already been an imbalance is now like a 3-to-1 imbalance. And so the shippers are preferring to have a quick turnaround and are sending empty containers back to China to fill up more and bring them to the US, rather than waiting, just pausing for a moment to get our agricultural exports into those containers and ship them across. And this has caused a real hardship. I mean, even if tariffs went to zero and there were no sanitary, phytosanitary issues, this would still be killing our farmers because they just can't even get it overseas. I mentioned our hay farmers before. And so then if we want to add to that, there isn't even predictability with when the ships will arrive. There's backups in Long Beach, there's backups elsewhere. Our farmers don't know when ships will be in port and when they should get their hay or apples to the port. And so if they miss the timing window, which I'm telling you is very, very narrow, then they have to pay fees also to the same shipping companies. They have to pay these detention and demurrage fees to sit there. If it's a refrigerated commodity, they have to pay for refrigeration. So they get these extra fees in addition to now what are just exorbitant shipping fees. And so this has been just it's been really harmful and perilous for our farmers, between the skyrocketing prices and just the lack of availability for shipping and the lack of containers. And so, you know, the longer term worry is really that our customers in China will get really frustrated. Like they're waiting for their shipment, the customers are waiting for their apples, they're expecting good quality, and they're expecting it to arrive on time. And then it doesn't because of, you know, a whole constellation of issues, but primarily the shipping issue. And I think this has to be affecting all of the people who are representing here today, because so much of the nation's exports leave through the port of Seattle. And so, yeah, I'm working with the Federal Maritime Commission to look into how to enforce shipping rules, to make sure the Shipping Act can be used to create a more level playing field and be fairer to our farmers. And I guess if there was something for me to ask, I would ask, you know, other states to join me, and would, you know, I know our farmers would really welcome a partnership with China to help kind of more normalize this trade relationship and to help the shipping system work in a fair way for our farmers, so we can both profit and we can both kind of meet our trade obligations. So that is my primary concern right now, and my farmers' primary concern.
Great. Thank you very much, Representative. I was not aware of that issue, but that's a good one that, again, we as states can all work together on. Well, I guess we shouldn't be terribly surprised. We had 6 politicians on this panel, so we're kind of running a little short on time. We only have about 5 minutes. But I do have the 2 congressmen from Nebraska. I'd like to kind of just combine together both Congressman Fortenberry and Congressman Smith, talk about a little bit of phase one update on agriculture, kind of where we are, what kind of challenges do we have, what are the things that the federal government can be doing to be able to make sure that we're reaching our goals with regard to phase one. So I'm going to throw that open. Maybe Congressman Fortenberry, I'll start with you, and then Congressman Smith, I'll go to you.
Well, again, the idea that the relationship with China, the China trading relationship had to be taken on, leaned into, to be restructured I was very supportive. The governor knows very well how much we deliberated over this in Nebraska because a disruption and potentially of our exports here has real impact on the ground. However, I found interestingly and importantly and notably that our farmers were supportive. Even though there was the possibility of short-term pain by entering into this type of dialogue and necessary restructuring of the trade deal, the trade relationship, they were very patient, and I'm grateful for that. Of course, we had some ways in which the dislocations were offset through federal funds, and that was important as well as a part of a holistic policy to trying to change things. I'll let Congressman Smith give the update on exactly where we are regarding phase one. Obviously, we would like it to be implemented perhaps a little bit more robustly, but a good start.
Great. Representative Smith.
Well, thank you. I'll try to be very brief here. The numbers speak for themselves. We've come, I think, a good distance with China phase one, but let me just toss some numbers out to you. China agreed to purchase last January the 15th of 2020, agreed to purchase at least $73 billion in U.S. ag exports over the course of 2020 and 21. So yes, 2020, it's been a challenge in many ways, but we're getting better at this, at answering the pandemic and so forth. So we've got some time to meet the agreement that China agreed to make. And so actually at the end of 2020, China clocked in at 27.2 billion in ag export purchases. So that's significantly more than 2017, but still short of that export target of 33.4 billion that was outlined in the agreement. Now we've hit record exports to China in beef, pork, hay, pulse crops, to name a few. Others like corn and wheat actually did better than 2017 as well. So I do want to point that out. But we know that we've got these challenges, as Ms. Schreier pointed out, the shipping challenge. That's let's face it, that is a non-tariff trade barrier, and this is an issue of extreme bipartisan concern. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity to work with my colleagues on that issue. So the long and the short of it is, given the fact that China's imports of agricultural products, only 14% come from the U.S., that shows that there's a lot of opportunity to meet those numbers that were agreed upon last year. So I think that the rules-based approach to trade that is so important, because I'm not convinced we have good international trade opportunities without rules-based approach. Mr. Hood talked about reforming the WTO. That's important as well. That can help us move forward in a way that, again, all countries can benefit from more open trade, free trade, fair trade. And that accountability, though, is very important to meeting those commitments that have been made. So thank you very much. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be in dialogue with all of you here today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Now we got like 2 minutes left. I don't know if we have a quick question that you can throw up on the screen here. Maybe we can have one or two of our panelists get to it. Okay. There are no notes or questions at this time. All right. You're all off the hook. We don't have any additional questions. Well, I just want to thank all of our panelists for being a part of this policy series. When we're talking about especially agriculture here, it's important to all of our states. Thank you for the folks who are joining us here in person, Congressman Fortenberry, plus all of our folks who are joining us virtually. We really appreciate you taking the time for us. And I hope you all enjoyed the rest of the conference. Thank you very much. And again, we look forward to more dialogue on this U.S. China relationship.
Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Ricketts and Representative Fortenberry. And thank you to all our panelists for sharing the perspective from your states and districts that produce agricultural products vital to our country's economic and national security. We really appreciate you. We are now at the end of our first session. Coming up in session 2, we are thrilled to welcome both Mr. Matt Murray, who is Deputy Assistant Secretary for Trade and Policy Negotiations at the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs in the U.S. State Department, and the Honorable Mike Hilgers, Nebraska's esteemed Speaker of the Legislature, to speak in our second session. A panel discussion on agricultural trade opportunities will follow. So thanks so much for joining us for session 1, and we look forward to hosting you again in session 2. Thank you.